Hello, and welcome to this week's lecture on fostering peer play for those children who are on the autism spectrum. We're taking time to look at this topic, thinking about its relationship to social development at this point in the semester because it's a good follow-up to our topic from last week when we looked at inclusion. So when we're thinking about placing children who are on the autism spectrum within an inclusive classroom setting, we really have to take time to think about the entire experience that that child will have within the classroom setting, right? So we know that depending on the type of classroom, whether an early childhood setting or a public school setting, that this child is probably going to be receiving services. The child will probably have some instructional goals that might be listed on an IEP. The child will have some language challenges that might be being addressed in a variety of ways. All of these things will be part of their inclusive program. But we can't also forget that this child is going to be a part of the social environment of the classroom, because we know from everything we've learned so far this semester that children with ASD do encounter significant challenges learning how to play, to socialize, and form friendships with peers. We have to think about this area of their experience within our classrooms in a targeted and strategic way. So let's remind ourselves first why they do encounter these challenges. We know that children who are on the spectrum have impairments in reciprocal interactions. It's difficult for them to initiate interactions with other people. It's difficult for them to understand the meaning of others when they are interacting with them. It goes back to those concepts of theory of mind and some of those other topics that we discussed earlier this semester. We know that children on the autism spectrum have challenges with communication, both verbal and nonverbal. So those are going to impair their ability to play and interact with their peers in a positive way. And we also know that children on the autism spectrum often have difficulty with imagination. And this can show up in a variety of ways. And since we're specifically talking about play this week, it's easy to see how imagination and play are connected. It's important to keep in mind as we discuss this topic that most of the evidence out there does suggest that children with ASD share the same desire for play, companionship, and peer group acceptance as their typically developing peers. And that may have come up for some of you in the book reviews that you completed for this class as you were looking at the experiences of those individuals. So why should we foster peer play? Here are a few reasons that we want to think about its importance. And it goes beyond simply just, all children should play, or we want the children to be happy in our classroom. There are really some very concrete reasons that we want to do that. So we know from studies of both typical and non-typically developing children that play helps children to develop their interpersonal skills, their social knowledge, and their symbolic capabilities. When children engage with other children in rich, dramatic play that's full of imagination and symbolism, they are developing many skills at once, many knowledge bases at once, in a way that really can't be duplicated in any other fashion. And we want to remember that language is a symbolic skill. Play is a symbolic skill. So typically when children play, when children play in a typical imaginative way, they use many objects in symbolic ways. And so if we want to be able to increase a child's capacity for use of symbol systems, play is a wonderful way to do that. We know that children who play together regularly develop peer groups, peer cultures, and that leads to the development of foundational social skills. And we spent a lot of time earlier this semester talking about those social skills. So not only, does peer play kind of grow an individual in a lot of ways, it also grows a child's social abilities, and it increases their toolbox of social skills that is available to them. And we can almost go without saying, but it's a good reminder that friendship occupies a central place in children's social lives, and it does serve as a determining factor for social adaptation and adjustment. It's not the only factor. We know that. there are many different relationships that are important factors, but this is one of them, and it deserves our attention. And then we can think back to what we might know about Vygotsky. He was a Russian developmental psychologist, and he really, in his theory, emphasized the importance of the social environment to the extent that he said that social interactions will affect all domains of a child's development, and that social learning will typically precede development. So social learning, in Vygotsky's theory, is necessary for development, and cognitive development is the end product of socialization. So, if we're looking from a developmental psychological view at children's development, peer play is an important building block, to say the least. So here are some of those challenges that children on the autism spectrum are going to face when they try to play with their peers. Oftentimes, they're detached. They lack awareness of and interaction with others. They may seem like they're in their own little world. They may seem really oblivious to the presence of others around them. So obviously, a child can't play with another child if the child doesn't notice the other child or doesn't care that the child is there. We also know that children who are on the autism spectrum, even though they do typically play, right, they interact with toys in a manner, their play often lacks creativity and direction. So this is something that we should all be fairly familiar with now. Children who are on the autism spectrum, we're going to see them playing with their toys in rather unconventional ways, right? They're very preoccupied with lining up their Hot Wheel cars or sitting there and spinning the wheels on their Hot Wheel cars, but not necessarily setting up a town and driving their cars all around the town. Often their interests may be very narrowly focused, and that makes it difficult for them to engage with other children in play. So we see all of these lack of imaginative play and creative play affecting their ability to engage with other children, because other children are not going to be very likely to want to join the child with autism in simply stacking and unstacking blocks over and over for an hour. Right, because the typically developing child is going to want to play with the blocks in a much more imaginative way. When a child does have a deficit in peer play, we're going to see a lot of results, a lot of impacts on that child. And again, these are some of the things that came up in your Willis textbook. Some of the results might include peer neglect or rejection. So the child is not included in a positive way in their peer group. We might see bullying happen. It's very easy for a child who's acting in a very different way in the peer group to be bullied. This can cause depression for the child. It can cause withdrawn or isolated behaviors that may be even self-injurious, low self-esteem, and loneliness. All of these negative results of a child not being able to engage in positive peer play. So as teachers in an inclusive classroom, how can we encourage positive peer interactions for children on the spectrum who are being included as part of our classroom? So we know the importance of peer play and why we have to strategically approach this issue. Again, most of these ideas are coming from your Willis text. We have to be an observer, a careful observer, a kid watcher. There are many different questions that you can ask yourself as you observe the child who is in your classroom, and these can be applied to a child with autism who's in your classroom, or it could be applied to a child who just seems very socially awkward, who seems left out, who has maybe a different developmental disorder, and is being included in the classroom. So these questions can apply to children in a variety of contexts. So we want to find out things like, does the child prefer a toy or object? What activity does the child seem to repeat? What materials does the child use most often? So we're going to see a lot of children with autism return to the same toys or the same activity or the same theme over and over and over again. That's another one of the questions down here. If pretend play does occur, is there a favorite theme? And it can be easy at times as the adult in the child's life to feel like we need to help the child to broaden their interests and get away from their obsession, whether their obsession is trains or elevators or dinosaurs. And while, yes, there are appropriate times for broadening the child's interest, there's also a benefit to fueling their passion and to honoring their passion. If you were to ask someone like Temple Grandin, right? A really famous animal researcher who has autism. She has her PhD. She would say, don't take away their passion. That might be the one thing that really saves them, that motivates them through their entire life. And so there are ways to honor that and to build upon that within the classroom setting. Certainly we want to find out what the child has with him that's important to him. Is there something that makes him more comfortable when he's playing or interacting with others? Does the child play with others, and who does he play with? We know that there are going to be children with a wide range of social abilities in our classroom. Does the child seem to interact really well with some children and not with others? We want to be aware of that if we're going to be carefully structuring social situations and play situations. So after we've observed the child, it's time for us to start encouraging the play. These are some kind of general things that we can do. So we want to focus on the child's interests, like I just mentioned. We want to make the interactions as natural as possible. So when we're encouraging play scenarios, if we want to encourage the child to play with blocks in a more creative way, we want to do that in the block area, inviting another child over that we know is going to be a positive play partner. We want to be sure we always recognize the child's potential difficulty with new situations, maybe just changing one thing at a time or introducing one new variable. If we're going to be introducing a completely new play activity, we want to be very careful to explain and provide photos, especially when more than one step is involved. That can help children to have clarity and focus on each part of the process or the activity that we may be doing. If the child is playing, let's say in the block area, we need to be sure we allow the child to leave when overwhelmed. Play is supposed to be fun, and play is no longer going to be fun if the child is feeling stressed or overwhelmed. And that will obviously decrease the child's interest in returning to that play situation later in time. Using peer buddies, like I mentioned, a child that we know will be a great match and compatible with the child that we're trying to support. As much as we're trying to encourage peer play, we also want to honor the child's need to play alone. There's certainly no reason that a child has to play with someone else all day long, and in fact, they're going to benefit from some back and forth time to be on their own and then to be with others. And just like we do for all children in our classrooms, we want to provide a warning when play needs to end, helping them to transition to whatever the next activity is going to be. And last, here's some more specific ideas related to teaching play strategies. So introducing one new toy or activity at a time, right? So we're not going to introduce a creative way to build with blocks while adding in, using literacy skills to make signs for our block structure while bringing over some toy cars and making it kind of a complicated play activity. I'm going to keep things pretty focused and simple. Breaking things down into steps and showing the child the steps. And if we're going to be structuring a certain play activity, a very short period, 5 or 10 minutes might be what's appropriate to just begin things for the child. Talking about the activity, like we mentioned. And then thinking about self-stimulatory activities that the child might do. We talk about arm flapping and, other kinds of hand wringing, things that children on the autism spectrum are prone to do. Sometimes we can help them with that in play situations where, it's difficult for another child to play in the block area with this child if he's always flapping his hands and knocking over the blocks. Well, maybe we can give him something to hold or a movement activity to do ahead of time that will help him to relieve some of that stress related to his need to move his body. And these last 2 points, of course, use the child's name when teaching a new skill and model the steps before encouraging the child to try. So you can turn to the Willis textbook for a little bit more detail on all of these topics, and I look forward to seeing how we connect this important topic with the topic of inclusion from last week.